What happens when the desire for control crosses the line? When instead of security, it creates fear, and instead of order, it destroys everything around it. The 8 passengers case exposed something terrifying, something that affects all of us. The obsession with control comes at a cost, and often it's much higher than we imagine. What if the real mistake isn't losing control, but never having it in the first place? What if everything you believe about control is completely wrong? 8 passengers shocked the world, but what no one realized is that this story reveals something much bigger. And maybe this is the time to see the truth. Have you ever felt like you're holding on to life so tightly that instead of finding peace, all you get is more tension and exhaustion? That feeling that if you're not in complete control, everything is going to fall apart. You plan, predict, organize, but somehow things still slip out of your hands. You try to shape the people around you, hoping they'll act the right way. But in the end, it all just turns into frustration. And the most intriguing part of it all, the more you try to control things, the more life seems to slip away, like sand running through your fingers. If this resonates with you, know that you're not alone. In fact, this is one of the biggest traps of the human mind, and it might be keeping you from living with more ease, clarity, and purpose. Over the past few days, one case has taken over social media, a case that shocked millions. A seemingly ordinary family, a YouTube channel that for years showcased a routine of discipline, rules, and parenting methods. But suddenly, everything fell apart. What looked like structure turned out to be oppression. What seemed like control became a cycle of pain. This case isn't just another internet story. It's a mirror of something much bigger. It reveals a deep truth about the way we try to govern our own lives and the lives of those around us. But here's the question. Does control really give us power? Or does this obsession make us prisoners of an illusion? Today we're going to uncover this hidden truth. We'll dive into why the need for control leads to suffering, and how a simple yet powerful principle can free you from this cycle. The answer might not be what you expect. The need for control is one of the biggest traps of the human mind. At first, it seems logical. We plan, set rules, organize everything around us because we believe that's how we'll stay safe. But more often than not, this need turns into something much deeper and more dangerous. In recent days, a real-life case has brought this issue to the forefront. The 8 Passengers channel was one of the biggest family vlogs on YouTube. For years, it showcased the disciplined routine of a mother and her children, presenting a rigid parenting model to the audience. To many, it seemed like an exemplary family, built on structure, principles, and values. But then, everything changed. The revelation that this extreme discipline hid abusive practices shocked millions. What once looked like responsible control was exposed as something suffocating and oppressive. The scandal sparked debates about how far the desire to shape and govern other people's lives can go before it becomes destructive. But this case isn't just about one family. It reveals something bigger, a pattern we see in many areas of life. Think about relationships. How often does someone try to change their partner, convinced that if they just followed certain rules, everything would be fine? Think about the workplace. Controlling leaders believe strictness leads to efficiency, but in reality, they create stifling, demotivating environments. And think about yourself. How many times have you tried to plan every detail of your life, only to realize that in the end, nothing went as expected? This happens because we're dealing with an illusion. Absolute control simply doesn't exist, but our minds fight against this truth. The problem is that this fight comes at a cost. The more we try to impose control over something, the more resistance we face. And that resistance creates pain, frustration, and vicious cycles that make us feel even more trapped. If we try to control people, we end up losing connection with them. If we try to control life, we lose spontaneity, lightness, the true experience of living. So what's the alternative? If we can't control everything, does that mean we're doomed to chaos? No. There's another way, a path that has been taught for thousands of years, yet few truly understand. Life is like the ocean. The waves come and go, sometimes calm, sometimes overwhelming. You can try to fight the current, swim against the flow, but in the end, the ocean will always be stronger. This constant movement is one of the fundamental laws of the universe. The ancients called it the principle of rhythm. Everything has its cycle. Everything moves between extremes. Day turns into night. The tide rises and falls. Moments of growth are followed by moments of retreat. This dance is inevitable. But what happens when we try to interrupt this natural rhythm? When we insist that things stay exactly as we want, at the exact moment we desire? That's what we saw in the 8 passengers case. The illusion that rigid rules could shape everything, that extreme discipline would guarantee a predictable outcome, ignored a fundamental truth. Life isn't an exact equation. People aren't machines. Everything has its own time, its own way of growing and evolving. And this need for control isn't just present in that story. How many times have you tried to hold on to something that was clearly changing? A relationship that no longer made sense? A job that no longer gave you purpose? A plan that didn't go as expected? But instead of accepting the flow, you resisted. You fought against change, tried to keep everything in place. And the more you held on, the more painful it became. The irony is that resistance doesn't stop change. It only makes it harder. The pendulum will always swing back. If you try to hold back the tide, it builds up. And when it finally breaks, it comes with even more force. And maybe that's why so many people feel stuck in this cycle. They try, they push, they do everything to keep things under control. But deep down, they realize something is always slipping away. When we start to understand this dynamic, everything begins to make sense. If this content is already giving you new insights, hit the like button now. It helps this knowledge reach more people who need to hear it. Because this need for control doesn't just show up in our actions. It also shapes our emotions, our thoughts, our relationships. But what if instead of resisting, we learn to move with the rhythm of life? Every force you apply to something creates an opposing force. The tighter you grip, the more it slips away. The more you try to dominate, the more resistance you face. This isn't a coincidence, it's one of the fundamental laws of the universe. The principle of polarity described in Hermetic teachings shows us that everything has 2 opposing extremes, and these opposites aren't enemies but rather 2 sides of the same energy. Light and shadow, hot and cold, order and chaos. They are poles of the same existence, constantly interacting. When we try to exert absolute control over something or someone, we create a rebound effect. If you impose rigid rules, the natural response is rebellion. If you force a river into an artificial path, sooner or later, it will overflow. That's balance in action. The 8 passengers case demonstrated this perfectly. The extreme attempt to enforce discipline didn't result in harmony. It led to repression, fear, and eventually, an inevitable collapse. The desire to keep everything under control created the very chaos it was meant to prevent. And if you look around, you'll see this pattern everywhere. Governments that try to censor end up fueling revolts. Parents who smother their kids with excessive rules often raise children who rebel completely. Companies that enforce rigid work environments lose their best talent to more flexible and adaptable workplaces. Now think about yourself. In what areas of your life are you trying to force something to be exactly the way you want? How much of that struggle is truly necessary? And how much is just fear of letting go? Maybe what you're trying to control is exactly what needs freedom to find its natural balance. If everything you try to control in the external world keeps slipping through your fingers, then where does true power lie? Where is the kind of control that actually works? The answer isn't out there. It never was. It has always been within. Ancient Hermetic teachings reveal a secret that few truly understand. The all is mind, the universe is mental. This means that everything we experience is first created in consciousness. The external world isn't something separate from us. It's a mirror of our internal state. But most people live the other way around. They believe that by organizing the world around them, they will find peace within. They try to control people, events, and outcomes. They think that if they can avoid unpredictability, they can avoid suffering. But that's the great mistake. When the mind is in chaos, the world only reflects that chaos back. The 8 passengers case is a clear example of this. The obsession with absolute control didn't come from strength. It came from fear. Fear of failure, fear of losing authority, fear of the unknown. And fear, when left unchecked, disguises itself as rigidity. The belief that extreme discipline would bring security ended up creating the opposite: disharmony, suffering, and ultimately, collapse. But this isn't just the story of one family. This is the story of all of us. How many times have you tried to control someone out of fear of losing them? Or insisted on a plan just because the alternative was facing uncertainty? How often have you suppressed your emotions, believing that was the same as mastering them? The truth is, the more we try to control the external, the more we become prisoners of it. Real control isn't about manipulating reality. It's about transforming how you perceive it. When you shift your consciousness, what once seemed chaotic starts to reorganize itself naturally. What once felt out of control begins to flow. The world doesn't change because you forced it to. It changes because you did. If trying to control everything only leads to pain, then what's the alternative? Just accept chaos and let life take over? No. The real answer isn't in giving up. It's in conscious surrender. But let's clear something up. Surrender isn't weakness or passivity. It doesn't mean sitting back and accepting everything without question. On the contrary, true surrender requires a strength that few possess, the strength to trust the flow of life. Think of a river. The water doesn't fight against the rocks. It doesn't try to force a path where there isn't one. It adapts, flows around obstacles, finds its way. And because of that, it reaches the ocean. Meanwhile, those who fight the current, who try to control every detail of the journey, wear themselves out. They grow tired. They lose their way. Now tell me, what resonated with you the most? What was that moment when something truly clicked? Drop your answer in the comments. Your perspective might open new doors for others watching. And if this conversation spoke to you, subscribe to the channel, because this is just one piece of the puzzle. In the next videos, we'll dive even deeper into these insights. Speaking of which, there's a follow-up video waiting for you at the end of this one. Don't click just yet, but save it. It'll help you connect all of this in an even clearer and more practical way. Now stay with me, because what comes next might be the most powerful insight of all. Hermetic teachings show us that there's a big difference between action and resistance. The principle of cause and effect teaches that everything we do creates consequences. But those consequences don't come just from our actions. They come from the intention behind them. If you act out of fear, you attract more fear. If you act out of tension, you create more resistance. But if you act from a place of trust, you create a natural flow that takes you exactly where you need to be. This doesn't mean being naive or letting life happen without participation. It means learning to discern what needs action and what needs to be allowed. Now, think about the hardest moments in your life. How many of them weren't caused by the events themselves, but by your resistance, by your fear of letting go, by your need to control what was never in your hands to begin with? The truth is, surrender doesn't weaken us, it frees us. It doesn't mean losing power, but understanding where real power lies. It doesn't mean abandoning responsibility, but learning to flow with wisdom. Because those who fight life wear themselves out, but those who learn to trust find the path with much greater clarity. The 8 passengers case isn't just an isolated story. It's a mirror of something that happens all the time, in different areas of life. The illusion that controlling everything will bring us security. But what this story really showed us is that absolute control doesn't equal order. In fact, more often than not, it's the root of chaos. The tighter we hold on, the more things slip away. The more we impose, the more resistance we create. And by the time we realize this, we're often already trapped in a cycle of fear, anxiety, and frustration. Hermetic laws teach us that reality operates far more wisely than we tend to believe. The principle of rhythm reminds us that life moves in cycles, and resisting this flow only leads to suffering. The principle of polarity shows that the extreme desire for control inevitably creates its opposite, collapse. The principle of mentalism reveals that true power isn't about shaping the external world. It's about transforming our perception of it. And this brings us to the most important lesson of all. Real power isn't about holding on tighter, but about knowing when to let go. Now, take a moment to reflect. Where in your life are you holding on to something that you should be letting go of? What battles have you been fighting that don't actually need to be won, but rather understood? What would happen if, instead of forcing a path, you allowed it to reveal itself? Maybe it's time to take a deep breath and let go. Letting go doesn't mean losing. It means trusting. It means understanding that life knows what it's doing, that there is an intelligent flow happening at all times, and that resisting it only pulls us further away from the peace we seek. Because at the end of the day, true freedom isn't about controlling everything. It's about learning how to dance with the universe.